When did you last ask your mother how she was really doing? Not the call where you check in for 4 minutes between meetings. Not the visit where you sit at the table and eat and talk about ordinary things and leave feeling like a good child. When did you last look at her face, not her words, her face, and ask what was actually there? Daniel Osei was a millionaire. He called his mother every night without fail. He had built her a room with a chair by the window and a jacaranda tree outside it and a photograph on the wall of her younger laughing self. He thought he was paying attention. He was not paying attention. And by the time he finally saw what was actually happening to the woman who had raised him alone, worked 3 jobs for him, sold everything she owned for him, by the time he finally looked past what he was being shown, 14 months had passed. 14 months of his mother sitting in a room that was too cold, eating meals that were too small, hearing words in corridors that no one else was meant to hear. 14 months of his mother saying she was fine every night on the phone. Because she loved him too much to tell him the truth. This is her story. And it will stay with you long after it ends. Because somewhere in it is someone you know. Someone you have been meaning to check on. Someone who will tell you they are fine. Ask again. Hello friends, before we begin today's story, please like this video and subscribe if you are new here. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Are you in Nigeria, the United States, the United Kingdom, Ghana, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica? We read every single comment and we want to hear from you. Daniel Osei was 39 years old when he became a millionaire. Not the kind who inherits it quietly. The kind who builds it from nothing, brick by brick, year by year, in a way that leaves marks on you long after you can afford to stop grinding. He owned a real estate company that had transformed an entire district on the west side of the city. A medical supply company with contracts across 4 states. A logistics firm that had started with 2 second-hand vans and a prayer and was now running 43 vehicles across the country. 260 employees. A reputation for showing up early, keeping his word, and never forgetting where he came from. That last part mattered most. Because Daniel Osei had come from very far. He grew up in a single room at the back of a compound house in a neighborhood where the roads turned to mud when it rained and cracked earth when it did not. 7 families sharing one outdoor kitchen. Thin walls between lives. Noise at all hours. Daniel grew up in the middle of all of that with one person anchoring him to the world. His mother. Rose. His father had left when Daniel was 4. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a slammed door. He simply stopped coming back one day. There one morning, gone by evening, as though he had stepped out for something and decided he preferred wherever he was going. Daniel had no memory of his father's face. Only a vague impression of a tall shadow in a doorway. He did not miss what he could not remember. But he understood from very early that his mother did. He could see it in the way her hands would slow over the washing sometimes and her eyes would go somewhere far away before coming back. He never asked where she went. He just waited for her to return. She always returned. Rose was a small woman with large hands and a voice that carried further than her size suggested. She sold provisions from a wooden table outside the compound gate. Canned goods, soap, candles, matches, small bags of rice and flour. She was there before sunrise and stayed until the last light was gone. She knew every customer by name and knew their families too. She extended credit to people who could not ask for it directly. She kept a small notebook with names and amounts that most people never fully repaid and that she never once mentioned to anyone. She was the kind of woman a whole neighborhood relied on without realizing it. At home she was everything else too. Cook, nurse, teacher, the person who checked his homework twice and prayed over him every night and got up in the dark when he had a fever and sat beside him until morning. Daniel remembered one such night when he was about 9. A bad fever. The ceiling moving. He opened his eyes in the dark and saw his mother sitting on the floor beside his mat, her back against the wall, her hand on his forehead. Her lips were moving. He could not hear the words, but he knew what they were. She had not slept. He could see it in her face. He remembered thinking, even at 9 years old, she will not let anything happen to me. That thought was the most solid thing in his entire childhood. More solid than the compound walls. More solid than anything the world outside their room could offer. He was still carrying it at 39. Rose kept Daniel in school no matter what it cost her. The year he was 13 the school fees went up. Rose sold the small television set, the only luxury in their room, and told him it was broken beyond repair. He believed her for 7 years. He found out the truth from a neighbor who mentioned it casually and then looked immediately embarrassed. He never brought it up with Rose. But he filed it away in the place where he kept all the things she had given him that she thought he did not know about. He stood on his own feet at 26. One small contract. A borrowed truck he drove himself. He ate cheap food and wore clothes until they could not be worn anymore and put every coin back into the work. By 29 he had a real office with his name on the door. By 39 he had more money than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. And his mother was still sleeping in that single room at the back of the compound house. He drove there on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He parked outside the compound gate and sat in the car for a moment looking at her wooden table. The canned goods arranged neatly. The small handwritten price signs she had always made herself. He got out. He knocked. He heard her voice asking who was there. He called back. Silence. Then footsteps. Then the gate opened and she stood there looking at him the way she always had, straight through whatever he was showing on the surface to whatever he was actually feeling underneath. "Mama," he said. "Pack your things." She started to say something about not wanting to disturb his life. He stopped her gently. "You spent 30 years making sure I had a life worth living," he said. "Please. Let me spend some of it making sure yours is good." She packed that same afternoon. She did not take much. She never had. But she folded everything with a care and neatness that turned packing into something dignified. Something that said, everything I own is worth treating well regardless of what it is. The house sat on a quiet road on the northern edge of the city. 6 bedrooms. A kitchen large enough for 20. A garden that wrapped around 3 sides of the building like an arm around a shoulder. Daniel had chosen his mother's room himself. The one at the end of the east wing whose window looked directly into the garden. Morning light came in gold and clean. In the afternoons the jacaranda tree near the wall made moving shadows on the floor that shifted slowly as the sun moved, like something breathing. He had a chair placed by the window before she arrived. The kind a body could rest in completely. A footstool. A small table beside it for her Bible and her tea. He had hung one photograph on the wall. An old photograph he had kept for 20 years. Rose outside the compound gate, standing beside her wooden table, arms crossed, head back, laughing at something the camera had not caught and never would. "This is your home, Mama," he told her. "Not a guest room. Your home." She stood in the doorway and looked at the room. The chair. The light through the jacaranda. The photograph. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "You kept this," she said. "I kept everything." She did not cry. Rose had never been a woman who cried easily. But she stood in that doorway and breathed the way a person breathes when they have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and have finally been given permission to set it down. Daniel had met Celeste at an industry conference in the capital. She was presenting a panel on urban development and she did it with the kind of fluency that comes not from preparation alone but from genuinely understanding the material at a level deeper than words. He introduced himself afterward. She shook his hand and said she knew his company's work. She said the West Side development had changed the conversation about what was possible in neglected districts. She said it as a fact, not to flatter him. He liked that immediately. They had dinner that evening and talked for 4 hours. She was educated, precise, funny in a dry understated way. She had her own consulting firm and a life that was already organized and full before Daniel walked into it. He found that genuinely attractive. He was not looking for someone who needed completing. He was looking for someone already whole. He introduced her to Rose 2 months into the relationship. A Sunday lunch at the house. Celeste arrived with flowers and a small bag of chin-chin. "I remembered you mentioned your mother liked it," she said. That detail stayed with him. She had listened to a passing remark from weeks before and turned it into a gesture. That was the kind of attention that was hard to fake. Or so he believed. Rose had talked more freely at that lunch than Daniel had heard her talk in months. Celeste asked questions that showed she was genuinely paying attention. She helped clear the table without being asked. When Celeste left that afternoon and Daniel walked her to her car, she turned and said, "She is remarkable, Daniel. You can see everything she is made of just by watching her hands." 3 months later he proposed. 6 months after that they were married. The wedding was everything Celeste had planned with characteristic precision. 300 guests. A hotel ballroom with flowers on every surface. Celeste was luminous in a dress that had taken 4 months to make. Rose sat in the front row in a pale green dress Daniel had chosen for her. She watched her son at the front of that room with her large hands folded in her lap and her face very still and very full. In every photograph from that day she is smiling. The first months after Celeste moved in were good. She redecorated the sitting room. She hired a household manager named Abina. She was attentive to Rose. She stopped by her room in the mornings to ask how she had slept. She remembered Rose's preferences without being reminded. No pepper in her soup. Strong tea. The news program at 7. When Daniel traveled he called home every night. "How is Mama?" "She's wonderful," Celeste always said. "Warm. Easy. We sat in the garden this afternoon. She was telling me about the market she used to go to when you were small." Daniel would feel himself relax on the other end of the line. The relaxation of a man who has checked on something important and found it still standing. He did not know that the house had 2 different faces. He did not know that his mother had already begun, quietly and without complaint, learning how to disappear. It started with small things. The way Celeste's voice changed when Daniel left. Not dramatically. Just a degree colder. The way a room changes when a window is open somewhere and the warm air slides out before anyone realizes they are cold. Celeste stopped coming by her room in the mornings. The conversations at meals became shorter, more functional. Information exchanged rather than connection made. Rose told herself Celeste was busy. Young women carried a great deal. She did not take it personally. She made her own tea. She sat in the garden. She was grateful. But it did not stay at coolness and distance. About 3 months after the wedding Celeste came into the kitchen one morning while Rose was warming leftover rice on the stove. Celeste was dressed for a meeting. She looked at the pot. "The kitchen staff makes breakfast," she said. "I know, dear. I just prefer to make my own. I don't like to trouble anyone." "It's not about trouble." Her voice was pleasant. The voice of someone explaining something reasonable. "It's about the kitchen running properly. We have systems here. I used 1 cup of rice, dear." "Today," Celeste said. "Please wait in the dining room. Staff will bring you whatever you need when they arrive." She paused at the door. "It's a beautiful kitchen. I'd prefer it stayed that way." She left. Rose turned off the burner. Covered the pot. Went back to her room and waited for 7 o'clock when someone would bring her breakfast on a tray. She ate it alone. She did not mention it to Daniel when he called that evening. By the 5th month the shape of Rose's life in that house had been made very small without anyone appearing to make it smaller. She no longer used the main sitting room. Celeste had not forbidden it directly. But twice when Rose had been sitting there reading, Celeste had come in with guests and there had been a particular pause. A specific arrangement of Celeste's expression. Rose had gathered her things and excused herself both times. The third time she simply did not go. She ate most of her meals in her room now. She moved between her room, the garden when weather permitted, and the corridor to the bathroom. She had become, in a house her son had built, a woman with a very small map. And Daniel came home every few weeks and saw a mother who said she was fine. Who sat in the garden when the weather was good. Who asked about his meetings and laughed at the right moments on the phone. He saw what he had been shown. He believed what he had been given permission to believe. There was the matter of the medication. Rose had high blood pressure. A prescription she had been on for years. Daniel had set up a standing order at a pharmacy nearby and Abina collected it monthly. 1 month it did not arrive. Rose mentioned it to Abina. Abina said she would check. A week passed. She mentioned it again. Abina looked uncomfortable. She told Rose that Mrs. Celeste had asked her to hold the household medical orders while she reviewed the budget. Rose thought about calling Daniel. He was in the middle of a major negotiation and she had heard the exhaustion in his voice the last 3 evenings. She did not want to add to that weight. She went without her medication for 11 days. Daniel happened to ask about it on the 11th day during their evening call. She mentioned it carefully, almost as an aside. He was back in the city the next morning. He came home with 3 months of medication and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her. "Why didn't you tell me? You were busy, son. I didn't want to worry you." He asked Celeste about it that evening. She explained it with perfect calm. A miscommunication with Abina. She had asked for a list of standing orders to review, not to pause any of them. She was sorry. It would not happen again. She spoke in the reasonable clear voice of someone explaining something entirely reasonable. Daniel told himself he believed her. Or he chose, without fully examining that choice, not to look at it any more closely than he had to. That choosing would cost him. The words began around the 6th month. Not arguments. Not raised voices. Nothing that could be described to someone else and be fully understood. Just words in private moments. In corridors. In doorways. In rooms where no one else was present. The first time, Rose was in the garden early one morning watching the light come through the jacaranda. Celeste came through the garden door dressed to go out. She stopped when she saw Rose. "My colleagues are coming this afternoon. I need the garden. Stay in your room." "I am Daniel's mother," Rose said quietly. "This is my son's house." Celeste looked at her. Something had left her voice. Some layer of performance that was usually present. "Daniel is not here," she said. She let that sit for a moment. Then she went inside. Rose sat very still and let the words settle. "Daniel is not here." It was a statement of fact. It was a warning. It was, beneath both of those things, a declaration. A declaration of exactly who held power in this house the moment the gate closed behind Daniel's car. The cold came without announcement. The temperature in Rose's wing of the house was consistently lower than the rest. She found 2 extra blankets in a storage cupboard and said nothing more about it. The meals changed quietly. The things she liked stopped appearing. The variety she had enjoyed in the early months narrowed into something simpler and repetitive. And the words in private continued. Each time a little further than the last. You need to understand your position in this house. Daniel has a life now. A real one. You are part of his past. Be careful you don't become a problem. Do you know what happens to women like you when the guilt wears off? When their sons finally move on properly? I do. And there will be no one to stop it. Rose heard these things and held them and said nothing to anyone. Her sister was on the other side of the city. The house staff were employed by Celeste. And Daniel, her boy, her reason for every hard year, was building a life, and she would not be the reason it broke. So at night, before she slept, she prayed. She sat in the chair by the window and looked out at the jacaranda in the dark and spoke quietly to the only one she trusted with the full truth. I am not asking for much, she said. Just let my son see. Before something happens that cannot be undone. Lord, let him see. She prayed that prayer every night. She kept praying it. The day that crossed every remaining line started simply. Daniel had been gone 10 days. Rose had not left her room since morning. At 2 in the afternoon she realized she had not eaten since the previous evening. She waited. No tray came. At 2:30 she walked to the kitchen and found bread in a cupboard and began to make herself a simple sandwich. Celeste appeared in the doorway. She looked at Rose at the counter. At the bread. Then at Rose's face with the flat look Rose had learned came just before something. What are you doing? Making something to eat. I haven't eaten today. Why haven't you eaten? No one brought anything. Go back to your room. Rose set down the bread knife. She turned to face Celeste fully. She was a small woman and Celeste was taller and younger and standing between her and the door. But Rose had survived too much to be made small by a doorway. I am Daniel's mother, she said. This is my son's house. I am going to make myself something to eat. Celeste crossed the kitchen. She stood directly in front of Rose. Close. The way you stand when you want someone to understand how much space you can occupy compared to them. Let me tell you something, she said in a voice so quiet it would not have reached the hallway. Your son built this house for his wife. For his future. For the children we will have. You are here because he feels guilty when he looks at your face. Because he remembers being poor and the guilt comes and he cannot say no to it. She paused. Her eyes were flat and certain. But guilt runs out, she said. Every woman who has ever managed a man knows this. And when it runs out you will go. And there will be nowhere for you to go. Because everything you have belongs to him. And everything of his belongs to me. She stepped back. She looked at the bread on the counter. Put that away. Go back to your room. Someone will bring you something later. She walked out. Rose stood in the kitchen alone. She looked at the bread she had not been permitted to eat. She put it back. She wiped the counter. She walked back to her room and sat in her chair and looked out at the jacaranda. A bird had landed in the upper branches and was making a sound she had never been able to name. She watched it for a long time. She opened her Bible. She placed her hands flat on the open pages. Lord, she said. Just that word. Once. And then she sat in the silence and let it be enough. Daniel came home on a Friday evening. A week early. The eastern site was ahead of schedule and his project manager had told him frankly he was not needed until Monday. He came through the gate, parked, and sat in the car for a moment. The house looked as it always did. Lights on. Celeste's car in the drive. Everything in its place. He stepped inside. Abina appeared almost immediately. She looked at him and he saw something cross her face. Relief. The specific relief of a person who has been carrying something alone and has just seen someone arrive who can finally deal with it. Mr. Daniel. We didn't know you were coming. Is everything all right? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked toward the east corridor. Your mother, she said. And stopped. He was already moving. He knocked on his mother's door. No answer. He knocked again. Mama. A sound from inside. Then her voice, small and careful, come in. He opened the door. The room was cold. He noticed that before anything else. The evening outside was cool but not cold and the room should have been warm. He looked at the radiator on the wall. It was off. His mother was in her chair by the window wrapped in 2 blankets he did not recognize as the ones he had bought her. Her large hands rested on her Bible. She looked up at him and her face opened the way it always did when she saw him. But her face in the window light was not the same as her voice on the phone. He could see it even through the blankets. She was thinner. And there was something in her eyes that had not been there before. A tiredness that was not the tiredness of a bad night. The tiredness of months. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair. He took her hands in his. They were cold. How long has the heating been off? It's fine, son. Mama. How long? A while, she said. I didn't want to make trouble over something small. He sat on the floor in front of her chair. He held her cold hands and looked up at her face and she looked down at his and they stayed like that for a moment in a room too cold in a house that was supposed to be her home. Tell me, he said. Tell me what is actually happening. She shook her head. The old gesture. I don't want to be the reason your home falls apart. You are my home, he said. You have always been my home. There is nothing you can tell me that will change what matters here. She looked at him for a long time. At the jaw set the way it always set when something was decided. At the eyes that had always been impossible to lie to completely. And then she told him. Not everything at once. She told him pieces. Framed carefully the way she had always framed hard things. The kitchen. The meals. The cold. The medication. She held back the words in corridors and doorways. She held those back because even now some part of her was still protecting him from the full weight of it. Daniel listened. He asked careful questions. He did not push. He slept in the chair beside her bed that night. He sat in the dark while her breathing settled into sleep and he thought about the nights she had sat beside him on the compound floor when he was sick. The lips moving in prayer. The hand that never left his forehead until morning. Then he took out his phone and sent one message to his lawyer. I need to talk tomorrow morning. Early. He left the house at 7 the next morning before Celeste was awake. He drove to a security equipment supplier near his logistics office. A man named Mensa who knew him and did not ask unnecessary questions. He bought 3 things. A small digital voice recorder no larger than a matchbox. 72 hours of continuous recording on a single charge. A second identical one as a backup. And a motion-activated micro-recorder housed inside a unit designed to look exactly like an ordinary wall plug adapter. The kind that sits in a socket and charges phones. It would activate automatically whenever someone entered the room. He paid cash. He drove back to the house. Celeste had left for a client meeting by 9. He knew her schedule from the shared household calendar, a habit from the early months of the marriage she had never thought to change. He went to his mother's room. Rose was in her chair. She looked at him when he came in and at the bag he was carrying. He sat across from her and placed the small recorder on the table between them. "I need your help," he said. She looked at the device. Then at him. "I cannot prove what you have told me without evidence," he said. Celeste is careful. She does not do these things in front of witnesses who will speak. But she does them in front of you. He showed her how the recorder worked. One button. Press once to start, once to stop. He showed her how it fit between the pages of her Bible without showing. He explained that she did not need to do anything differently. She did not need to say anything or provoke anyone. "Just carry it and live your life," he said. "That will be enough." Then he showed her the wall plug recorder now sitting in the socket just inside her bedroom door, replacing the phone charger adapter that had been there. Indistinguishable from any other adapter. Rose looked at the device in the socket. She looked at the small recorder in her hand. She turned it over slowly in her large hands. She was quiet for a moment. "You want me to record her," she said. "I want the truth to have a voice," he said. "Since it has been voiceless for too long." She was quiet again. Her eyes went to the window and the jacaranda moving slightly outside it. Then she looked back at her son. "You know," she said quietly. "I have been praying every night for God to let you see." "I know, Mama. I did not expect He would let me help." Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something older and more wondering than a smile. She closed her hand around the recorder. "All right," she said. "All right, son." He covered her hand with his. "Don't change anything about how you move through this house," he said. "Just live. That will be enough." He was right. It took 4 days. Daniel moved through those 4 days with the disciplined calm he brought to every complex situation he had managed in 20 years of building businesses. He came home from the supplier that morning and was warm and easy with Celeste over breakfast. He asked about her week. He sat across from her at dinner and was entirely himself. Each evening he went to his study, locked the door, and reviewed the recordings. The first 2 days gave him ordinary sounds. Rose in her room. Her Bible pages turning. Abina bringing a tray and speaking to Rose in the careful warm way of someone who had become an ally without being able to say so openly. The third day gave him everything. He sat at his desk with headphones in and listened. The recording began with footsteps on the corridor floor. Then his mother's voice saying she hadn't eaten and was going to make something simple. Then Celeste's voice. Every word clear. Every word exactly as his mother had described and worse in the hearing than in the description. "Your son built this house for his wife. For his future. You are here because he feels guilty when he looks at your face." He listened to it twice. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly for a long time. He had known, the way you know something you have been choosing not to examine too closely, that something was seriously wrong. But knowing and hearing the actual voice of it were entirely different experiences. He took the headphones out. He sat in the locked study and let himself feel it completely for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he picked up his phone. He called his lawyer first. "I have the recordings," he said. "I am ready to move. I need the documents prepared by end of week." Then he called his mother's older brother. Uncle Kofi. A retired teacher who had always been the person the family brought its hardest situations to, not because he was loud but because he was steady and clear-eyed and could hold difficult things without dropping them. "Uncle. I need you at the house on Saturday evening. Bring Aunt Vida." "What is this about?" "I need family present, Daniel said. For what I am going to do. A pause. Is Rose all right? She will be, Daniel said. After Saturday she will be. He spent the remaining days preparing completely and quietly. He spoke to Abina privately. She had been carrying more than he had understood. She told him what she had seen over 14 months. The medication order. The instructions about the kitchen. The heating system which had a smart controller that could be set by zone and had been. A particular afternoon when she had stood in the corridor outside Rose's room hearing Celeste's quiet voice through the closed door and not knowing what to do. He thanked her. He told her her job was not at risk regardless of what happened next. He reviewed the legal documents. He made 2 amendments. He signed what needed to be signed. He invited Celeste's parents and her younger sister to the dinner without explaining why. A family occasion, he said warmly. Just people who mattered. He told Celeste he wanted a small family gathering on Saturday. She was immediately pleased. She liked the table set correctly and a life on display worth displaying. She reached across the dinner table and put her hand over his. I'd love that, she said. I know you will, he said. He smiled at her. He did not tell her that every arrangement had already been made. That the only thing left to organize was the moment itself. Friday afternoon he went to his mother's room. She was in her chair. He sat across from her and held out his hand. She placed the small recorder in it. He already had what he needed from the wall unit. He held the recorder for a moment. You were very brave, he said. She looked at him steadily. I just lived my life, she said. The way you told me to. That was the brave part. He looked at her in the afternoon light from the jacaranda window. Tomorrow evening, he said. I need you at the dinner table. Your seat. As my mother. As the woman whose name is going on the deed of this house. She went still. Put on the pale green dress, he said. The one from the wedding. She looked at him for a long time. Something moved through her face in layers. Surprise. Understanding. And then something she had not worn on her face in a very long time. All right, she said. Her voice was steady. All right, son. Saturday evening. The house was warm and lit. The dining table extended to its full length, dressed with white linen and proper glassware and flowers from the garden arranged simply. The particular atmosphere of an occasion prepared for carefully. Celeste moved through the preparations with her usual efficiency. She looked, in the dress she had chosen, exactly like a woman who knew how to host a dinner people would remember. She had no idea how correct that last part was. The guests arrived from 7. Celeste's parents came first. Her younger sister arrived with them, quieter than her mother, watchful in the way of younger siblings who have spent their lives learning to read rooms. Uncle Kofi and Aunt Vida came at 7:15 and Daniel went to receive them personally. He held his uncle in the embrace for a moment. Kofi looked at him with a question in his eyes. Daniel shook his head slightly. Later, he said quietly. Just be here. Kofi nodded once. They sat. The food was served. The conversation moved easily. Celeste was magnificent. She drew people out, remembered details, moved the conversation with the ease of someone born for this. She was exactly the woman Daniel had met at that conference. Warm. Fluent. Completely convincing. Daniel sat at his end of the table and ate and talked and was entirely at ease. Rose sat midway along the table in her pale green dress. She ate quietly. She answered when spoken to. She was exactly herself. At the end of the main course, Daniel set down his fork. He looked around the table. He waited for a natural pause in the conversation. Then he stood up. The table quieted. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said. His voice was calm. "I asked you here because I have something important to do and I wanted family around me when I did it." Celeste looked at him from her end of the table. She was smiling slightly. She assumed this was a toast. She sat a little straighter. "4 days ago," Daniel said, "I came home early and found my mother in a room that was too cold, wrapped in blankets that were not hers, thinner than she should be. When I asked her what was happening, she protected the person responsible, as she had been protecting her for 14 months, because she did not want to be the reason my marriage failed. The table was very still. So I asked her to help me find out the truth for herself." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed the small recorder on the table. "She carried this for 4 days," he said. "In her Bible. In the Bible she reads every night to pray for her son." He looked at Celeste. Then he pressed play. Celeste's voice came out of the small device and filled the dining room. "Your son built this house for his wife. For his future. For the children we will have. You are here because he feels guilty when he looks at your face. Because he remembers being poor and the guilt comes and he cannot say no to it." No one at the table moved. Guilt runs out. Every woman who has ever managed a man knows this. And when it runs out you will go. And there will be nowhere for you to go. Because everything you have belongs to him. And everything of his belongs to me. A pause on the recording. "Put that away. Go back to your room. Someone will bring you something later." Daniel pressed stop. The silence that followed was not the silence of people waiting for something. It was the silence of people who have heard something they cannot put back. Celeste's mother had one hand pressed flat on the table. Her husband had put his fork down and was looking at nothing. Celeste's younger sister was staring at the recorder with an expression that was working very hard to find an alternative explanation and failing. Uncle Kofi was looking at Rose. Rose was looking at her hands folded in her lap. Her face was very still. Celeste said his name. "Daniel." Her voice was not what it usually was. Something had left it. "There is more on that recording," he said. "And more from the device in the socket outside her door. I have 4 days of recordings. I have statements from 3 members of the household staff. I have the pharmacy documentation showing 11 days without her blood pressure medication. And I have the smart system temperature logs for the east wing of this house compared to the rest of the building over the past 8 months." He said all of this in the voice he used in boardrooms. Clear. Even. The voice of someone presenting facts already independently verified. "I have all of it," he said. Celeste's face had gone the color of something drained. She looked at the recorder. She looked at the faces around the table. She looked at her mother's face. "Daniel," she said. "What you heard, it was taken out of context. We had a difficult relationship. I said things I shouldn't have said, but it was not. She went 11 days without her blood pressure medication," Daniel said. Silence. "In a house with a budget that could have kept 20 people in medication for a year," he said. "My mother. Who has hypertension. 11 days. Celeste's mother made a sound. Something that was not words. "I am not going to raise my voice," Daniel said. "That is not what this evening is." He turned from Celeste. He walked to his mother midway along the table. He pulled out the empty chair beside her and sat down. He took her hands in both of his and held them on the table where everyone in the room could see. "Mama," he said. She looked up. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice remained steady. It cost him to keep it there. "I built this house for you. I told you it was yours. And then I left and trusted that because I had arranged things correctly they were actually correct. I was not paying attention. I was comfortable with what I was being shown and I chose not to look past it." Rose's eyes were filling. Slowly. Without rushing. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry you spent 14 months making yourself smaller every week so I would not have to choose. I am sorry you slept in the cold rather than worry me. I am sorry you went without your medication rather than interrupt a phone call. I am sorry for every morning you woke up in a house I built and felt like you did not belong in it." A sound came from Rose. Small. The sound of something held in very tightly for a very long time and finally permitted to come out. She pressed her free hand over her mouth. "This is your home," Daniel said. "I am making certain of that tonight. Legally and permanently. Your name is going on the deed of this house. Not as a gift. As a correction of something that should have been done from the beginning. Uncle Kofi is here to witness it. The documents are already prepared." He looked at his uncle. Kofi nodded once, slowly. "And I am restructuring my schedule starting Monday," Daniel said. "I will be home. Not calling from a hotel room 300 kilometers away. Here. In this house. With you." Rose looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "That is why it means something." Celeste's younger sister pushed back her chair and stood up. She was in her mid-20s and she had been sitting at this table watching something she did not have the right words for. She looked at Rose. At the pale green dress and the large hands and the tears running quietly down the face of a woman who had spent 14 months being very careful not to let anyone see what was actually there. "I want to say something," she said. Her voice was not steady. Everyone looked at her. "I didn't know what was happening here," she said. "I want to say that clearly. But I also want to say that I sat at a table in this house before. I ate food that this woman was not allowed to cook in her own kitchen. And I didn't notice she wasn't there. I didn't notice because I wasn't looking." She shook her head. "I should have been looking," she said. "I should have asked why the woman who raised the man who married my sister was not sitting at the table with us. I didn't ask." She looked directly at Rose. "I am so sorry," she said. "I am deeply sorry for what happened in this house and I am sorry I was not someone who noticed sooner." Rose reached across the table toward her. The girl took the offered hand and held it and cried openly the way young people cry when something breaks through the distance they have been maintaining from the world. Celeste's mother stood up. She looked at her daughter for a long moment. The look of a parent confronting something in their child they do not have a framework for yet. "Celeste," she said. Just her name. Nothing attached to it. Nothing needed. Celeste was sitting at her end of the table with her hands in her lap. The performance had come apart completely. She was looking at the recorder on the table. She was not looking at her mother. Uncle Kofi sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who chooses his words with care and permanence. "Your mother," he said to Daniel. "She called me once. About 2 months ago. She said she just wanted to hear my voice." He paused. "I should have gone to see her. I should have understood what that call was." "We both should have understood sooner," Daniel said. "Yes," Kofi said. He looked at Rose. "Forgive an old man for not seeing." Rose shook her head gently. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "He who sees, sees." That is enough. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and placed an envelope on the table. He looked at it once. Then at Celeste. The divorce papers were filed on Thursday, he said. Your access to the household accounts has been suspended. Your lawyer has been notified. You have 2 weeks to make arrangements. Celeste looked at the envelope. She looked at the wine glass she had raised toward her husband earlier in the evening when she had thought this night was hers. 2 weeks, she said. Her voice was barely a sound. I am being generous, Daniel said simply. He turned back to his mother. He stood up and held out his hand. Come, he said. I'll make you some tea. She let him help her up. He put his arm around her and they walked toward the kitchen together through the silence. At the kitchen door Rose stopped. She turned once and looked back at the dining room. At Celeste's sister still holding the napkin to her eyes. At Kofi and Vida. At the table with its good plates and flowers and the small recorder still sitting where Daniel had placed it. At the house. The wide hallway. The high ceilings. The light. Her son's house. Her name on the deed. Her home. She turned and walked into the kitchen. Celeste was gone before sunrise. No note. No conversation. Just the sound of a car in the dark, the gate clicking shut behind her like a full stop at the end of a very long sentence. Daniel heard it from the kitchen where he had been awake for an hour. He did not move. He stood still and listened to the silence that came after. The first clean silence this house had held in a very long time. He put the kettle on. He made his mother's breakfast himself. Tea with 1 sugar, strong. Toast with the butter already melted in. Ripe plantain from the market on the road near his logistics office, the same market she used to tell him about on the phone. Fried with just enough salt. He arranged it on a tray. He carried it upstairs. He knocked on her door. Come in, she said. She was already awake. In her chair by the window in her housecoat. Her Bible open in her lap. Her large hands resting on the pages. The morning light coming through the jacaranda the way it did on good mornings, in pieces, through the leaves, arriving slowly. She looked at the tray. Then at him. You didn't have to, she said. I know, he said. He set the tray on the table beside her. He pulled the footstool over and sat close the way he had as a boy in the compound room when the world felt too large and he needed to reduce it to the size of 1 room, 1 lamp, 1 person. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Outside the bird that had been in the upper branches of the jacaranda that day Rose had stood alone in the kitchen, that bird, or one very like it, was there again. Making its nameless sound. Is she gone? Rose said. Yes. She nodded slowly. She looked out at the jacaranda. Are you all right? She said. He looked at her. I was going to ask you that. I asked first. He almost smiled. I will be, he said. I need a little time. But I will be. That is honest, she said. He handed her the tea. She wrapped both hands around it. He watched her hands. The large hands that had built a life from a wooden table outside a compound gate. The hands that had covered him when he was sick and extended credit to people who could not ask for it directly and carried a small recorder and a Bible for 4 days so that the truth could finally have a voice. How are your knees? He said. She looked at him. Then she laughed. A small genuine sound, surprised out of her. That, she said, is what you want to ask me. It is what I should have been asking all along. She stopped laughing. She looked at him with her sharp clear eyes. Her hand came up slowly and she placed it against his cheek the way she had when he was small and had been hurt, and she wanted him to know she had him. He leaned into it. Just slightly. Just enough. "You saw," she said softly. "That is all I asked for. That is all I prayed for. You saw. I should have seen sooner." She shook her head. "You saw," she said again. "That is what matters. You saw, and you came and you sat on the floor in front of my chair and you held my cold hands." She paused. "That is everything, son. That is absolutely everything." He pressed his forehead against her hand and stayed there for a moment. Outside, the jacaranda moved in the morning wind. The bird made its nameless sound. The light came in through the leaves in pieces and fell across the floor and across the two of them sitting together in the quiet of an ordinary morning in a house that was finally, completely, fully hers. That was all. That was everything. Somewhere near you right now there is a woman sitting quietly in a room that is too cold or too small or too silent. She woke before the house. She made her own tea. She is grateful for the roof and the bed and the fact that her children are doing well, and she will not say a word to complicate that. She is not asking for much. She is not asking for anything. She spent her whole life making sure you did not have to be asked either. She sold things from a wooden table before sunrise. She sat up through fevers. She put other people's needs so far ahead of her own that she has almost forgotten she has any. Ask her how she is. Mean it when you ask. Ask again if she says fine. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that a woman who carries a recorder in her Bible for 4 days so that her son can finally see the truth deserves to have that truth told. We will keep telling these stories. Every one of them. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. And if you have a mother or a grandmother who gave everything and never once kept score, say her name in the comments. Let her be seen here even if she never knows it. We read every single one. Like this video if Rose's prayer moved something in you. The woman who prayed every night for her son to see and then carried the answer to her own prayer inside the book she was praying from. Share this with someone who has been too busy to call home. You might not know what that call would mean. You might not know what is happening on the other side of it. And the next time someone you love says they are fine, look at their hands. Look at how they are holding themselves. Look at whether the tiredness in their eyes is one bad night or 14 months. Then ask again. We will see you in the next story. Take care of each other.